Okay, good morning to you all. So this is the third roundtable of our international conference related to this Jean Monnet project, We the People of the United Europe, Reflections on the European State of Mind. And this morning's roundtable will be on mapping challenges of EU enlargement to the Western Balkans, from memories to current conflicts, and I think maintaining the characteristics of the first two roundtables. This roundtable will also be very interdisciplinary because we will have a combination of lawyers, historians, political scientists, anthropologists. So I think from this point of view, we're confirming the trend that we had in the first two roundtables, which, excluding my own intervention, I think was extremely interesting. Now, I hope I will be able to substitute Professor Scarciglia as chair in the best possible way. Professor Scarciglia will intervene at the end to draw some conclusions with respect to these 2 days. And another thing that I need to underline is the fact that unfortunately for family reasons, Ambassador Pribicevic cannot be with us. So the first paper will be by Irena Ristic from the Institute of Social Sciences in Belgrade, who will be talking about the war in Ukraine, an additional obstacle or a new chance for the EU enlargement in the Western Balkans. Irena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin. And yes, thank you, Laura, for organizing the main part of this event. I'm glad to be here once again. And after yesterday's focus more on legal aspects or the legal part of this Jean Monnet project, today we are switching a bit to the part that is also part of this project, or of how it was imagined, and this is the focus on the Western Balkans, and to see how much, also memory and conflicts and the state of mind in Europe is impacting this region and all these countries and their enlargement, the EU enlargement. Okay, I will, yesterday, inspired by also this, I have to say, yesterday, this slide. I was the colleague who was greeting us on behalf of the rector yesterday. He was mentioning this quote of Konrad Adenauer, which I then recalled as something that, I heard it many times before, but I found it also good for introduction, or let's say a motto of this presentation. If you remember, he said the European Union was a dream of a few, it became a hope for many, and today it is a necessity for all of us. He said this, Konrad Adenauer, in '54, and I agree with the colleague who said yesterday that, in fact, we can use this quote, or it is, it is more than applicable also today. What I originally wanted to talk about in this presentation is to see how much are both the Western Balkan countries and the European Union doing currently, or in the last 20 years, to make this necessity really come true, and whether we are facing something that is a process which nobody neither the region and the people in the region nor the EU member states really want to acknowledge to themselves that this process, that the awareness that this necessity is, that it is a necessity, that this awareness in fact is not as present in all our minds as it was maybe even in 45. Okay, in order to start, or as a pre-context for my main argument, I want to have a look on what the EU enlargement has been or was right after the fall of the Berlin Wall and in this first wave, so until 2004, or let's say the first wave of enlargement in 2004 and 2007. The first, this first wave was had three characteristics, and later I will try to draw parallels in the same way to the process that followed. So after, well, the first what we can see now, looking back on this process, this first wave of enlargement, was that there was a joint commitment. And that both those states who wanted to join and the core members of the European Union had this joint commitment to unify East and West. And there were basically no major disputes. There were some little bilateral disputes, but they were all sorted out without big complications. The second thing and the second motivation in this first wave was that there was a strong economic interest. And this was a major incentive for both those joining and those who were already member states. So this, as we know from the literature, was a crucial incentive to push and to do legal reforms. We talked yesterday about the more in an abstract or more theoretical way of the importance of the rule of law, of the Rechtsstaat, but we know in order to get there in one way or another, some legal reforms are also needed, and a part, of course, of changing some also the mindset, which of course always is a longer process. So these legal reforms that were done back then in this first wave had this economic incentive to both by core states of the European Union, but also by these states who wanted to join. And finally, what we know also from literature, that is called some mutual reinforcement. We can see that these processes and that there is a dynamic in which candidate countries are pushed by this incentive to reform themselves, because they have a high motivation to get there, because basically let's say the results for them are very tangible, and this was also pushing them to go ahead. While the European Union back then, the core members, were not at all so much insisting on everything that we see now, and what I will talk about later when we come to the Western Balkans states, so that there are many states there have more and more additional conditions. So what we can see from this process until 2004 was that the candidate countries were doing as much as needed, while the European Union was willing to accept as little as necessary. And this, I don't mean this even in an ironic way, it was meant as, okay, we will help you, we will do it on the way. Once you join, we will find a way to adjust, as more or less it proved to be right for these countries, where we could see that in most of those states that entered 2004 and 2007, there were no major backclashes apart. I mean, we are not going now into ideological changes or some rising populism that we can observe in Poland or in Hungary, but if we look at these new member states, we see a trend of not going radically back to what was before. I tried to frame a bit this. How could we frame this motivation, this strong motivation for the unification back then? And it was, of course, the economic interest that I already mentioned, a strong economic interest to unite. But there was also a strong, I call it here, intellectual motivation. The idea of unity was very strong in the 90s. So the idea of unifying something that should, or that everybody thought belongs together, East and West. And there was also another, so we had this driven by intellectual elites supported this project. So we could not observe big doubts in the mainstream towards the project of enlargement. The other also very important motivation was the feeling for responsibility, also among the both political and intellectual elites who were saying Europe should never ever be divided again. So we should push this unification to send the signal to these people, you are part of Europe. And this made this enlargement in 2004 and then also 2007 with Bulgaria and Romania something that could, in the history of EU enlargement, really be described as a success story when it happened. Now, what happened in the meanwhile with the Western Balkans? I mean, we know that there was the Yugoslav war, that for these reasons mainly everything that happened in Eastern Europe until between 1990 and 2004 was postponed in the Western Balkans. And that this process in the Western Balkans basically started when the first wave was almost over, so after 2000. And of course, the European Union had also changed in the meanwhile, and what we can observe as three major points in the EU enlargement of the Western Balkans is that there was not this, while in the first wave there was this joint commitment and even a joint enthusiasm among both East and West. Here we observe since 2000, by the latest since the financial crisis, an enlargement fatigue, and both within the institutions of the European Union and among the people of the core states of the European Union, where we start to grasp that there is a fatigue coming in which polls show and surveys that people are saying, well, let's wait with another wave, or let's think of whether it is a good idea. As a second parallel, the economic interest also heavily decreased, and there was not anymore such a huge interest that could, in the same way as in the first way, push the legal reforms and push this wish to really prepare these countries for the rule of law, or to strengthen the rule of law. And as a consequence, instead of a mutual reinforcement, we can observe, in fact, a mutual discouragement. So we see that both in the European Union there is this fatigue, but we see also that mutually in the countries of the Western Balkans, the elites who were supposed to bring it on, and the public showed some kind of tiredness of this process because it did not go as fast as everybody hoped. And when we it was a quote that was also meant as a joke, but it turns out to be always over and over again truth, that the Western Balkans are pretending to reform and the EU is pretending that they want to enlarge, and that both sides are somehow living in this illusion to simply pretend that everything is okay, although everybody knows that it is not. So while this the first wave was driven by the idea of unity and of responsibility, here we can see that this second enlargement process is driven by anxiety and the lack of interest. Intellectually, the wind of change had passed, the idea, this enthusiasm is gone, and within the European Union, the economic interest and the economic security of the existing European Union became prevailed over the idea of a united Europe. So, and instead of never again a divided Europe, there is more now prevailing, never again the mistake of taking a country that is not maybe ready enough, or never again a Cyprus, never again something that could cause more problems. Now, if we now jump a bit and see what happened in February 2022 and the beginning of the war, we see that the Ukraine war is being perceived as a potential game changer. Will the EU enlargement get a new let's say, incentive due to the war? The Albanian Prime Minister, ironically, once when it was on the table that Ukraine will get the candidate status, he said, so it needs, it takes a war, an aggression of Russia on Albania in order to get the negotiations to be open, which he referred to how now everything, all these rules and procedures that the Western Balkan countries were faced for 20 years are now off the table for a higher motivation. Now, clearly this war in Ukraine opened the question what used to be the purpose of NATO after the Second World War, to keep Russia out, to keep the Germans down, and to keep America in. It seems like this is something that the EU is now applying on the Ukraine case, also according in regard to the to the Western Balkan countries, saying maybe we should now take them no matter what, just to keep Russia out, and the European Union, of course, in. What the Ukraine war also brought with itself was, of course, that the mental map of Europe changed. And all of a sudden, what used to be Southeast Europe in their mental map started to be part of West Europe. And like, let's make them part of us, which, of course, which are processes that cannot be changed that quickly in the mind of people. And what we have now is, of course, a mix of geostrategical motivation to offer a perspective in the EU for the Western Balkans, for the Ukraine, and for Georgia, for example. But we often also hear out of moral arguments. So we have to show Ukraine that we that it is part of Europe. We have to send a signal that they are part. Only that as soon as somebody steps out and says we should offer to Ukraine out of our moral responsibility a candidate status, there is immediately somebody else following, like in France, a minister who said, yes, but please read also the small print. You will get candidate status, but this does not mean that you will become a member state. I will shortly just go to my conclusions, if it's fine. Sorry. Basically, what we see is the trend and the support for the EU in the Western Balkan countries is decreasing, and this is a long trend since 2010. The Western Balkans are obviously on hold for the EU enlargement, and I want to stress also in these conclusions, it is the fact that the fact that the countries are not currently or in the stage to enter because is of course their fault alone. Nobody can blame the European Union saying you are not doing reforms in these countries. However, if we take the context that I tried to describe in my previous slides, we know that the history of enlargement of the EU shows that no country really did it out of wanting to reform. There was always an incentive, be it driven ideologically, be it driven out of economic reasons, or simply by the responsibility to create something that is one Europe. And how the European Union now ends up being perceived in the Western Balkan countries is more or less like an unreliable partner, because it has so many different tracks for every single country that we use that it is showing that there is not one procedure, there is not one rule. Geostrategic motivations are prevailing over economic or over political motivations, and this of course creates a huge confusion in these societies, in which that eventually leads also among the population of these states to feel that they are not really sure whether they belong to the European Union or whether this should be a main target. And this also explains partially also this trend that goes down in regard to the support for the European Union. Okay, I will leave it for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Ristic, thank you very much. I think I've got a sneaky feeling there's going to be a little bit of a debate and some questions on this later on, because I think you've brought up some extremely interesting points. Let me just remind people that are online that if they want to ask any questions, to use the domande e risposte or questions and answers box, depending on what Zoom you have. Now, I am going to hand the floor to my dear friend and colleague, Marko Milenkovic, who is at the Institute, also at the Institute of Social Sciences in Belgrade, but also a affiliated scholar of the CCSTD, and I've had the pleasure of working with Marko for many years. He's one of the pillars of our summer school in Montenegro on the European Union and legal reform. Now, Marko is going to be talking about differentiated integration of the Western Balkans, emerging alternative membership options. Marko, the floor is yours, if you can keep it within the 15 minutes.
I'll do my best. Thank you very much, Justin, for this kind introduction, and many thanks to Laura for involving all of us in this project and offering to, together with her, organize this third panel and put a focus on EU enlargement. So yes, today I'm going to speak about differentiate integration. So I'm going to speak about generally European integration of the Balkans, but from the perspective of alternatives and using the model of differentiated integration, notwithstanding the fact that still officially the policy on both sides, EU as well as prospective member states from the Western Balkans, is membership and wish of the countries to join the European Union. So, turning to differentiated integration, the concept many of you are supposed familiar with, and then applying it externally and looking into its external dimension. So there are numerous definitions of what the differentiated integration is, but as I put it here, it's in a way legal but also a political approach or a possibility for some states to participate or not to participate in some aspects of the European integration project. So to participate in some policies or decide not to participate. It has allowed a past for the integration to move forward more smoothly and to allow some states usually not to participate in some policies. Most notable examples are, of course, Euro or Schengen system, but there are other examples as well. In terms of external aspects of differentiated integration, those are primarily studied in a literature in the context of European Economic Area and European Free Trade Agreement countries. So most notably, rich European states who decide not to be the part of the European Union but to participate in numerous policies, most predominantly to be part of internal markets, as for Norway, Liechtenstein, and Iceland, and to have many more ties with the European Union. So in terms of Western Balkans, looking at other non-member states, we can frame some of the relations with the Western Balkans as differentiated integration, primarily in those areas when there is a large extent of legal alignment. So, notably, these comprehensive stabilization and association agreements do bring with them a wide-scale alignment and adoption of parts of a key from non-member states who just wish to align. Further on, we have Energy Community Treaty, which also provides for adoption of part of a key, and then in transport sector, alignment in civil aviation, and now formation of transport community, which should be one way forward for a rule transfer to candidate countries. Then we also have various EU programs and possibility to participate or engage with the EU agencies. For example, for rich non-member states of European Economic Area, this kind of engagement is much more wide. They are actually member states of 17 European agencies. For candidate countries, it has still remained quite limited, only with Turkey membership in 2 countries, but wide engagement with these regulatory bodies on various levels, helping the transformation of candidate countries. Now, speaking about the gradual move towards the EU membership, So the methodology for negotiating the accession of a new country to European Union has become very complex over the decades. It ended up some time ago by being divided into 34 or 35 chapters of legislation that need to be negotiated, and 2 years ago it was decided to basically group these chapters into 6 clusters as to allow faster opening or closing phases of negotiations. Why is this important? I think other participants in the panel will shed a light on how different member states tend to block non-member states in their accession talks. The underlying idea of this approach is basically phasing in countries gradually into EU policy, but it was also, for the first time, underlined that there is a possibility of reversibility. It still remains to be seen how this reversibility would look like. But some other aspects of this approach are also regular summits, which now take place twice a year. So, for example, only last week, before the EU summit, there was a summit between EU leaders and Western Balkan leaders, which we have to say, at least on a symbolic level, it's a very important development. Then there is also an economic and investment plan devised for Western Balkans 2 years ago. It is gradually being developed, but still more details remain to be seen. So moving now to alternative options. What is currently available or unavailable? Well, of course, firstly, we always have in front of us the model of European economic area. But again, I underline, these are rich non-member states who are intentionally out of EU and who are also contributing to EU funds, which is a very stark difference to what is needed by the Western Balkan states. However, this is a framework in which you do quite a comprehensive rule transfer to European non-member states. Then I always like to recall, and some other authors as well, one of the famous speeches by Professore Prodi, as we like to call him, back in 2002, and that speech was actually in the context of Eastern Partnership countries. But then he came with this very interesting idea, saying that we should be sharing everything with Union but institutions. And then, like, how do you devise a content for this? I mean, sharing everything but institutions sounds very interesting, sounds very catchy, but then in legal terms, we have to think of what that would present, and I think it could be a good starting point for future relations. And then we come to important questions. So how do we bring the current association process to the next level within the existing treaties, or we need maybe a reform of a treaty that is still debated? And how do you create some new structures that could accommodate engagement with the candidate countries? And I roughly want to discuss two things. So basically, firstly, the ideas of phase integration. So we even had the pleasure to have a wonderful master thesis defended by one of Justin's students. I also had the pleasure to lecture and also help her for her thesis and give her an interview for this. So this is a model that is getting more and more attention. There were of course different ideas over time how this should happen, basically in stages or in phases. Now there is this staged accession model which is being widely disseminated and discussed in capitals, with ideas of going from initial accession to intermediate accession, then having a new member states, which then finishes with a conventional membership with gradual increase of funds, but basically with countries not being able to have veto powers or just to be in this initial and intermediate accession present at meetings, but not making any decision. However, this would require change of the treaties. And then we opened the Pandora's box, because change of EU treaties is much wider topic than just enlargement. We will see whether this current Conference on the Future of Europe process will materialize in some new proposals for the There Is Now report, but we will see whether institutions and member states will move with the change of a treaty. So all these very complex ideas are very nice, very good for academics to discuss, but if you require a change of a treaty, then you are on a very difficult territory. There are new emerging initiatives. Well, new. Some of them are new. Some of them are actually not that new. They appear from time to time. Most recently by Austria in Slovenia, which is slightly similar to what I previously presented, but they envisage the participation in informal meetings of the Council. Already, as I outlined, leaders of the Western Balkan countries are having a little summit before the EU summit, which is good, but this would be a bit more. And then progressive integration into common markets, inclusion in tax policies, trade policies, and of course climate and energy policies, which are now pivotal to the European Union. Probably the most important thing remains the access to the European funds. And especially if you want to align fully with the most expensive parts of a key, that being protection of the environment, climate, and energy, candidate countries really need the help of the EU as demands really overcome the possibilities of Balkan countries to finance that. This approach, however, would not require treaty change and would resemble differentiated integration for countries of economic area, but with this big difference that EU would be giving more money to the candidate countries in order to implement EU policies. Coming to the end, alternative unions. So there were calls in previous weeks and months by President Macron and European Council President Jean Michel speaking about political union or geopolitical union. Last conclusions from the summit just a few days ago basically ended up with this, what I've put on the slide. Just a quick conclusion. Objective would be to foster political dialogue and cooperation, but really insisting on that framework will not replace existing EU policies and instruments, notably enlargement. Will fully respect the European Union's decision making autonomy. Agreement on this is still to be reached. And finally, coming to my last slide and my concluding remarks. So basically, next year we will be 20 years since the first prospect were given to Western Balkan countries to join. We have a huge enlargement fatigue that is obvious. The support is declining, as Irena underlined in the previous presentation. We have wide-ranging engagement with Union, which is already in place. The trajectories of differentiated integration I describe. And my conclusion and my message from this presentation would be basically EU transformative power should not be lost. It should be kept. It is being gradually recognized by the institutions, but we only have limited results. So EU should do more in order to keep the countries on a way of European integration and adoption of acquis. So there are various possibilities under current treaties or maybe under future reform treaties, most definitely under current treaties, to move forward and integrate the region. So thank you.
Marco, thank you. As the Italians would say, hai spaccato il minuto. Bravo. Okay, great. Now, from Milenkovic to Milenkovic, because we should have online Professor Miloš Milenkovic from the University of Belgrade. Are you there, Professor Milenkovic?
Hello, hello, Professor Frosini. Hello to everyone.
Hello, hello, welcome, albeit online. And Professor Milenkovic will be talking about a very interesting topic, which is heritage diplomacy as an alternative to heritage conditionality in the Western Balkans. Sorry, that was a question. Using intangible heritage as a stabilization mechanism. Professor Milenkovic, the floor is yours for about 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. It is an honor and joy to be able to address both colleagues and friends in Udine and in Italy once more. This conference aims to provide high quality debate and follow-up publications thanks to Professor Montanari and her team. So greetings to our organizers and thank you for having us. I hope I will contribute with a very short presentation on heritage conditionality versus heritage diplomacy, which is a model that already produced some promising results in Western Balkans, in Serbia especially. So it might be comparatively interesting and might be implemented in other troubled regions worldwide. I will discuss 4 theoretical issues with policy input. First, why is cultural heritage in general and intangible cultural heritage so politically sensitive? Then I will pass on some examples of cultural heritage instrumentalization in bilateral disputes, which is my main topic. Third, how ongoing research into this phenomenon has already advanced some policy proposals, and for the conclusion, how all of us, legal scholarship, anthropologists, heritage scholars, economic scholars, social psychology scholars, can enrich and support each other through this relatively new platform of heritage diplomacy, which is a mixture of cultural diplomacy and of science diplomacy. My findings and my conclusions are the result of work on 2 Jean Monnet platforms, Anthropology of European Union, the University of Belgrade, and We the People of Europe project at the University of Udine, headed by Professor Montanari. So under the beginning, I shall define intangible cultural heritage and explain why, in which context it becomes politically flammable. Cultural heritage includes more than just palaces and museums. its most politically dangerous component of intangible cultural heritage is the sense of identity it provides to communities. It gives communities a sense of belonging, of stability, of cohesion, and what is most important in the Western Balkans, of uniqueness. Even large imagined communities referred to as nations or peoples like Serbs, Italians, Bosniaks, Albanians, Croats, etc., define themselves on the basis of intangible culture. Intangible heritage is used to distinguish us from them who do not share our heritage. So this is where legal scholarship, political science scholarship, and anthropology intersect each other in intangible cultural heritage. So because intangible heritage is at the heart of identity, it is once again regarded worth dying for in Western Balkans, in many post-conflict regions as well. So my point is, if you use identity or heritage-related aspects, even in purely technical or legal terms, legal in nature, you may find to do something which is very risky and dangerous, in fact. An important type of such use is bilateral identity-related conditionality, when a country that is already a member of the EU uses identity issues during the accession process of another country which is not a member of the EU. And it uses it to obtain concessions from the non-member state that it would not have received otherwise. So that is the point, that is the meaning of bilateral heritage conditionality. And what about the context of which we are talking about here? Heritage has a high conflict potential, especially in re-traditionalized region of the Western Balkans. Research indicates that young people are focused on the primordial resources of the self, especially in Western Balkans. Young people live lives that are radically different from the lives of their parents. And what is worrying is the fact that they generally have no idea what was happening at the time before they were born or when they were small children, 90s. They celebrate war criminals as national heroes. They see ethnic cleansing as inevitable and historically predestined. They see planned pauperization of the populations by political or economic elites as a consequence of a foreign factor. And they show trust in public opinion polls, especially in churches and armies of their nation state. And what is more important, they perceive school as a deadweight, a place and time in which they cannot learn about real history, true politics, instead soaking up interpretations from the internet by extremists. So in such a political context, identity entrepreneurs freely revamp collective ethno-religious identities. So we knew all that, we understood all that. So we knew all that, but what is troubled is when governmental entities they started to use intangible culture as a resource in bilateral conflicts. So how did this happen? Unfortunately, by changing the conditions for admission for candidate states into EU, via culturalization and bilateralization of conditionality. At first, candidates saw EU conditionality as fair, as an acceptable asymmetry. 3 basic requirements a state must fulfill to enter the EU were normally seen as culturally neutral, as fair, as not endangering identity of a given candidate state. these three conditions, known as Copenhagen criteria, included functional market economy, stable democracy, and the rule of law. But then, in next step, when the requirements for the Western Balkans nations were spelled out in early 21st century, the recent past, war crimes, necessity of the full cooperation with the criminal tribunal for former Yugoslavia were considered as opportunities for Eurosceptics to become openly anti-European. They continue to openly and publicly disseminate falsehoods about the EU as an environment in which national identities would disappear, using allegedly anti-Serbian or anti-Muslim discourse, additional conditionality as an argument. So additional conditionality from tool converted to an tool integration tool converted itself somehow into an anti-EU argument. And what is most important, in third step, in addition to these regional counterindications, several member states began to use the Copenhagen criteria to add typically identity-based particular extra criteria. In this bilateral form, this is how further culturalized conditionality evolved. This is the most challenging phenomenon in terms of EU integration of the region. So, because bilateral conditionality is inextricably linked to identity-based issues, the conditionality approach as a whole now seems ineffective or less effective or counter-indicated, because it triggers exactly the sentiments that need to be avoided while integrating a society. So while countries that joined the EU were willing to give some, to give up some of their sovereignty during the process of joining the Union as a whole, they're not willing to give up a piece of their sovereignty to a neighboring country with which they have these historical disagreements or have even been into war with. So the reopening of old wounds created a space for anti-EU actors to colonize public discourse and capitalize on resentment and widespread sense of historical loss. This is why heritage should be removed from the accession process, or, as an alternative, be regionally and inclusively safeguarded by all of the states of the region instead. When we look at, you see this fourth slide, bilateral identity-based disputes in the Western Balkans.
Yeah.
Thank you. So when we take a look at the Western Balkans, all of the disputes are rationalized in identity terms. Although political or economic, they are presented as disputes over cultural heritage that someone wants to appropriate. Or in Serbia, they say we have to abandon our identity and our cultural heritage to become Europeans. So all of the disputes have an identity basis. Here are examples. In 2008, Slovenia versus Croatia. Allegedly, a dispute over fishing rights was in fact dispute about identity of a coastal populations. Are there Croats? Are there Slovenes? Croatized Italians? Who are they? So that dispute over fishing rights was in fact a dispute about identity of a population. Then in 2009, dispute over the name of the country of Macedonia, now Northern Macedonia. Greece stopped the accession talks with Macedonian government, allegedly because of the name of the country. But what was underlined its underlying problem was the fact that the identity of the population was disputed. Are there Macedonians? Are there Greeks, in fact? Are inhabitants of northern Greece province called Macedonia Greeks, or are they of Macedonian Slavic origin? So, and we see another example of bilateralized, culturalized conditionality used by a member state against candidate state or state who aspires to become a candidate. In 2012, there was an interesting issue in Serbia. The government of Romania blocked the accession talks with Serbia over a relatively small population of 50,000 people who call themselves Vlasi. Are there Romanians in fact, or some national specific national minority? So there was this dispute that is not over yet due to some incentives. Romanian government decided to reopen the accession talks with Serbia, but the Vlahi question, the issue of their identity, remained open. In 2015, Croatia blocked Montenegro's accession talk over an element of intangible cultural heritage, which is basically a 600 years old festival called Bokanevi. Allegedly about the cultural heritage, allegedly about the festival. Was it Croat? Was it Montenegrin? Was it something symbolic of particular regional identity of Bokeli population in Boka Kotorska Bay in southern Adriatic? That dispute was over, let's say over, by a joint session of two governments, government of Republic of Croatia and the government of Republic of Montenegro, and Montenegro accepted to name a Croat minority as a bearer of cultural heritage in Boka Bay, in southern Adriatic. So we see this is also a successful case of bilateral identity-based dispute by a member state against non-member state. In 2015 also, Croatia blocked Serbian accession talks over the contents of history textbooks and language school textbooks about the denial of separate, regarding the denial of separate Croat language and nation that could be found in some of these textbooks written by some of Serbian scholars who denied the existence of a Croatian nation, pretty much similar to denial of the existence of Ukrainian nation nowadays. And finally, in 2020, Bulgaria blocked Northern Macedonian talks, and that's dispute that still lasts, about the language and denial of a separate national identity of Macedonians, which underlies the allegedly publicized issue of some technical sort. So in all of these examples, we see that something that was meant to use as a post-conflict stabilization tool by international community was transformed into a cause of instability. Yeah. Many international organizations and institutions, Council of Europe, European Commission, UNESCO, World Bank, NATO, etc., use heritage as a conflict management tool. But there is a structural problem with that model that should be addressed together, interdisciplinary, by legal scholars, anthropologists, and other colleagues. UNESCO, both UNESCO and the Commission, left heritage and culture in the hands of national governments, which usually exclude minorities from the processes of research and safeguarding of cultural heritage, out of habit, inertia, or purposively. So there is an example that I'm into. I'm currently researching the fate of Serbian heritage in the Western Balkans, out of Serbia, as an open issue, as a flammable issue that will, I suppose, I hypothesize, prevent Serbian accession talks again. What is happening with Serbian heritage in Croatia and Montenegro and Bosnia and Herzegovina will soon, very soon, become an open political issue. So we saw that what was meant to be a stabilization tool was transformed into a cause, of instability. What can we offer as an alternative? We have achieved some progress in Serbia, achieved some progress in promoting the principle of inclusive protection of heritage, and especially of minority heritage in Serbia. Through a variety of research projects and programs, we even managed to integrate Bosniak elite into inclusive programs of safeguarding Bosniak cultural heritage through institutions and organizations of Republic of Serbia. In a way that was an applied humanities model, humanities which are usually considered distant, distant from reality, and obsolete, a necessary cost, demonstrated their value.
I think you need to change the slide.
Slide number 6.
And also, you've got about 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Inclusive safeguarding of minority heritage as an alternative. Slide number 6. Do you see it?
Yes.
Thank you. So what we managed to achieve, we managed to apply humanities, and ethnology and anthropology are considered humanities and not social sciences in Serbia. In applied humanities model, we integrated into research and safeguarding inclusively, all together, prominent representatives of Hungarian minority, of Bosniak minority, of Jewish, Roma, and other minorities, who now see the state not as an enemy, but as a tool for protection of their cultural heritage. So that, in a way, that was some kind of internal cultural diplomacy, or heritage diplomacy between the majority, Serbian majority institutions of the Republic of Serbia, and prominent minority, influential minority representatives. So the idea is to form a network of scholars and practitioners, professionals, to become a network, maybe official network, for inclusive safeguarding of disputed heritage in the Western Balkans. The idea is to use anthropology as a form of heritage diplomacy, applied anthropology, and also apply legal scholarship, and applied social psychology, economy, etc., in order to achieve political goals that were unachievable otherwise. So there is a primer, a model called stečci, tombstones, ancient tombstones that were very, very much disputed among Bosniaks, Serbs, Croats, and Montenegrins. Which heritage it is, a medieval Bosnian heritage, or Serbian, or Croatian, or Montenegrin. But now stečci are enlisted with UNESCO as a common cultural heritage through so-called serial nomination by multi-state nomination, by multiple states. as a common cultural heritage and listed at World Heritage UNESCO list. So when we, and I will pass to conclusion, Justin. Thank you for reminding me. So contrary to UNESCO intention or intentions of the Council of Europe, heritage safeguarding is used as officially and internationally legitimized exclusion of alternative interpretations of heritage within both majority and minority populations. So this holds a potential trigger of a constant conflict of interpretations of the same or similar set of heritage elements. That should be avoided. Conditionality should be cleared of identity-related issues, and if not possible, so let's get realistic. If that is not possible, identity should be instead put at the forefront of EU integrations, with inclusive regional approach to heritage elements that populations share while contest, in order not to be disputed anymore. So heritage promises a lot in that regard, and should be further investigated interdisciplinary as an integral part of EU accession agenda for the region. And I propose for further discussion and research that heritage diplomacy model, a mixture of cultural diplomacy and scientific diplomacy, especially the use of applied humanities in order to solve political issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Milenkovic. Thank you. I'm sure, again, if we have time for Q&A, there will be some interesting questions on this topic. Okay, thank you. At this point, I think if Dr. Bečko... Okay, Dr. Bečko, are you online?
Yes.
Now,
hello?
My question to you is, can you manage to do your talk in approximately 10, 11 minutes?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief.
Yeah, that would be great. So that we finish about 2 minutes. Okay.
Okay, I don't have
great.
a PowerPoint
okay, so
presentation.
You don't have. Okay, that might be a good thing actually. Okay, so.
Okay.
So Dr. Bečko, who is from the University of Tirana, and her talk will be "Save the EU's enlargement process!" ! Are the cases of North Macedonia and Albania undermining it? Okay, go ahead, Claudiana. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you thanks to all organizers for including this section on the EU enlargement and the European integration of the Western Balkans, because in my point of view, there is no sense of talking about the future of the EU without including somehow their relationship or their approach to the Western Balkans. My presentation will seem like a natural extension of Irena's presentation in the beginning, because I will go on talking about the change in the EU's enlargement approach towards the Western Balkans in these last years, and at the same time see whether the EU is being more geopolitical. Taking some ideas from your first day of the conference, my today's objective is an effort to see the case of Albania and North Macedonia as a challenger of the legal aspects of the EU. So, posing this case as a challenger of the legitimacy of some legitimacy aspects of the EU, like the refusal or the postponing of the opening of the access negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia within the European Council, is it a sign or a sign of a lack of legitimacy, although it might be legal as it is? As my previous colleague mentioned, it's not the first time that there are some bilateral disputes between member states and candidate states within the European Union. And it is normal to be like that when they are kept in the level of the EU's conditionality towards the Western Balkans. But when they are transposed to the European Council decisions, this might pose a question of legitimacy, because it's like within a country, like a national country, when legislative power is mixed to executive power or judicial power and vice versa. Why am I saying that? Because nevertheless, the positive avis of the European Commission since 2018 that both countries have completed their obligations to this stage, to the opening of the access negotiations, these countries have faced first the veto of France and Netherlands in 2019, and then the veto of Bulgaria in 2021 and 2022. Now, this is also an attempt to create like a Western Balkans approach to the European integration, like a Western Balkans perspective, because we are always used to put the blame only on the Western Balkans countries, which of course are responsible for making reforms and doing all what is asked to them, like their duties, homeworks, in order to integrate to the European integration, to the EU. But but in the same time, while we are talking about a European fatigue towards the Western Balkans, as Irena mentioned in the beginning, there also might be like a Western Balkans fatigue towards the European integration. And that will not be good for the region and for the whole European continent in the face of the Russian attack to Ukraine. So I just want to see, we all know the story. I'm not going to repeat it, but I just wanted to mention what have these countries done in order to fulfill their homeworks for the opening of the access negotiations with European Union. Well, Kosovo is on the same boat too, because Kosovo was expecting the opening of the visa liberalization with the European Union, which did not happen. For this, Kosovo signed the demarcation borders with Montenegro in 2018. The government of that time in Kosovo faced a very strong opposition from the opposition parties of that time, but nevertheless, they managed with many efforts to do this demarcation of borders with Montenegro. Albania started with a very deep judiciary reform in 2016, and it managed to change its constitution in order to build a high judiciary bodies in December 2018, and all the judges are going through a very strict and severe vetting process within this reform. The Republic of Northern Macedonia, as we all know, signed a Prespa agreement with Greece in the same year, in 2018. So these are very telling efforts in this direction, and also in the direction that the European Union is such reforming power and transformative power. But what happened with the question of vetoes? As we know, France in 2019 put it in a very put it in in a question of deepening through enlarging of the European Union, because France has always wanted the enlargement, and Germany vice versa, to go through at that time. We have to remember that Bulgaria did never mention a veto, but before the national elections in Bulgaria, which took place in November 2021, suddenly Bulgaria came with a veto idea to the North Macedonia, which of course influenced even the status, the path of Albania, because these countries were seen in a bloc from the European Union. So the idea is that somehow the European Council has become like a forum where, of course, the national interests are shown, but at the same time, they are sometimes taking in the scene of the European Council. There have been taken some mechanical or technical decisions instead of taking some political decisions. So the European Council, in this case, substituted the European Commission and took a technical decision for firstly postponing the opening of access negotiations, and then for not having a date for the international for the intergovernmental conference, which would have start formally these negotiations. In this case, this changing of places with the European Commission shows that the European Council has become like a forum where not only the national interests are shown, but where they are some countries are backfiring other or blackmailing others for national purpose, or for showing something within their opinion, public opinion, like the case of Bulgaria was. With the elections. But on the other hand, we must not forget that that President Macron always has to face this opposition of the Front National Party, and somehow he has to calculate his movement in order to not to have this like negative feelings, not to create like negative feelings in his country. In this way, there are several other consequences of what's going on in the European Council, and I will mention them very shortly, because then with our papers we will have the opportunity to widen on it. So. The European integration suddenly may turn into an empty notion after the failure to offer an organized or a structured approach to the Western Balkans. With these vetoes, some countries of the European Council will constantly have an alibi for not easing the barriers, artificial and non, to the Western Balkans towards their way to the EU in the future. The conditionality approach or process may lose its credibility, which may be transformed also in a loss of faith or a loss of being, if are becoming will go on becoming the obstacles for this enlargement process, then it will this approach, this fourth phase of enlargement, which has turned into a deterrence approach of the European or my country comes first approach, will continue, and the EU will never have an actorness or a geopolitical stage, a position in the global stage of the world, these countries might lose interest in enlargement and, which is more important, and I'm finished, the power in the region, a contested power from Russia.
Okay, Claudiana, I'm afraid we're going to have to close here because unfortunately there is also a connection problem here. We weren't able to hear you in the last couple of minutes. But anyway, thank you very much for your paper. And we look forward to reading the extended version. Okay, so our next speaker is Professor Daniela Calezan of the University of Montenegro, university that also cooperates with our summer school in the European Union legal reform. So Daniela is an old friend. Welcome. And Professor Calezan will be talking about social cohesion and conflict prevention in Western Balkan countries. And as I've already mentioned to Daniela, she has 10-12 minutes to give an overview on this topic, and then maybe we can come back with some questions during the Q&A session. Daniela, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Justin. Thank you for the invitation, and many thanks to Irena, Professor Laura, Marco, to you as well. It's always an honor and a pleasure to participate in similar events. Unfortunately, I already told you that because of technical issue, I can't share my PowerPoint presentation, but because I have 10 minutes, I will really try to say some focal points of my presentation. And please, if I'm not clear enough in any part of it, just ask me in this part predicted for our discussion. I will focus more on something that is part of the preparation for EU presentation integration, not on the process per se, or something that is happening from the perspective of EU countries on that part, but more in the part of our societies, because we must say that contemporary societies, and not only post-communist, non-consolidate democracies like Montenegro, are facing the challenge of achieving social cohesion. We can claim that there is a globally present tendency of researching these phenomena. In October 2020, research done by Ipsos in 27 countries, very relevant research, on a sample more than 20,000 people, shows that 41% of them perceive social cohesion in their own countries as weak. So one of the conclusions of this research was that we have a global threat to social cohesion. Researching of specificities of social cohesion achieving process, as well of its weak points, is something that is very important, because the matter of the question of EU integration of our societies is the question of their democratization. And big part, very important part of the process of democratization is the process of achieving social cohesion. Not just our societies, but all contemporary societies have to be successful in terms of minimizing disparities, minimizing and cutting actually discrimination, inequalities, minimizing inequalities, and to be able to manage different global risks in a successful way. So if society is not cohesive enough, it can't be stable and it can't be sustainable in the long run. This is very important, especially if we talk about society that is like Montenegro. Point one, ethnoculturally plural in higher degree. According to the latest population census in Montenegro, we know that Montenegro belongs to the group of countries with significant level of ethnocultural pluralism. In our ethnocultural structure of population, we don't have a dominant majority. So this makes the process of achieving social cohesion even more challenging. And point two, especially if we talk about societies that are placed in a region where we can detect traditionally already high level of politicization and instrumentalization of so-called traditional identities, ethnic, national, and religious. At the same time, every democratic society needs to be cohesive enough. So when about social cohesion, it's about a precondition and a goal at the same time. Society have to be cohesive enough, but also every successful society tends to be more and more cohesive in democratic sense of meaning. So the concept of social cohesion, of course, like similar concept, has had different meanings, depends from which scientific field we try to define this concept. So, for example, experts from law studies or political science or social science or identity politics field experts or conflict studies, they will all, let's say, define social cohesion in different ways. But for our purposes, I will actually put focus on two definitions and approaches to definition of social cohesion. One is developed within Council of Europe, and this is the approach that is, let's say, human rights-based approach, in which successful society and cohesive society must be able to manage ethnocultural diversities by minimizing inequalities and any kind of marginalization and exclusion. And it's not about being successful in this matter and in this sense of meaning, but also the cohesive society has to be able to create and to increase level of solidarity in a society. And this is something that I think will be more and more important for our societies. And of course, there is a fundamental responsibility of the states, but also other social actors like universities, media, non-governmental sector and others. They are also very important in the process of achieving social cohesion, and all of them help to develop awareness of importance of cohesive society. The second approach, or the second definition, is given by UNDP, and this approach is more conflict oriented in terms that this approach aim to provide a basis for a conflict prevention when we talk about social cohesion. So building social cohesion, according to this approach, will strengthen the resilience of states and societies. So this definition is focusing more on conflict prevention, peace building, and consolidation of democracy as a precondition for one cohesive society. It is important, in my opinion, for all our societies, when we talk about Western Balkan region, when we talk about Montenegro, first of all, to analyze main weak points of social cohesion in different dimensions. So the question of dimensions and the issue of dimensions is also very important. And of course, like when we talk about definition, there is no unique stance about most important dimensions of social cohesion. But we can say that there is some kind of compromise, and we can talk about two main dimensions. It is vertical and it is horizontal dimension. But for our purposes, I will use, in my opinion, very good effort of Bertelsmann Foundation. They developed so-called social cohesion radar, and they developed some graphic of main domains and main most important dimensions of social cohesion in 2015. So according to their project and according to their graphic, we can talk about three main domains. First is called social relation. With these social relations, within this domain, we can detect three main dimensions. Social networks, trust in people, and acceptance of diversity. So if we talk about Montenegrin society, and in this first domain, and in these first three dimensions, then we actually we start to ask questions about ethics of multiculturalism policy that is implemented in Montenegro as a model of ethnocultural pluralism governing. We talk about quality of relations between ethnic and national communities. We talk about social capital. Are we able to, let's say, mobilize social capital on the level of the society, or social capital is trapped within communities, ethnic and national communities most of all? What are effects of multiculturalism model? If ethnic distance is increasing, if between ethnic and national communities there is no interaction, exchange, and more understanding, like I mentioned previously in our meeting that we had before, then multiculturalism will be reduced to exercising ethno-national interest of particular communities, which is something that we consider as a big challenge and probably problematic from the perspective of social cohesion. So according to the research from 2019, and that research is called Interethnic Relations and Ethnic Distance in Montenegro, ethnic distance in Montenegro is increasing, especially towards Roma people. So data shows also that generally people in Montenegro don't trust in high level to the people of different ethnic and national identity. So European Social Survey shows from 2018 shows that almost 50% of people in Montenegro don't trust the people of other nationality. So if we combine all these data we have with some tendency that we can detect, in this first domain, you can say that we have a great challenges to face with in terms of further democratization of the society and achieving social cohesion. Second domain, I don't know how many minutes I have still, Professor.
You have about 2 minutes, Daniela.
2 minutes, okay. So second domain is more about vertical dimension of social cohesion. It's called connectedness with 3 main dimensions: identification, then trust in institutions, and perception of fairness. I will just say about this second domain that traditionally our weakest point maybe is connected with trust in institutions, like all other societies in the region. This is definitely something that we have best information, because this is always present question in different public survey, but traditionally people have lowest trust in institutions of the country, political parties as well. And only citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina, according to this European Social Survey, very relevant research, have a lower level of trust in most important institution of the country. Then there is a perception of fairness. Do people believe that they are being treated fairly? Here as well, we have some results that are not so, let's say, positive from the perspective of social cohesion, especially if we talk about that only 6.4% of citizens of Montenegro claim that political system in Montenegro gives equally chances to all. So it's also European Social Survey. But because time is just, I think I will make it shorter. Third domain is named focus on common good. Solidarity, helpfulness. This is something we don't have even data, because this is a part that was especially in this pre-COVID time period mostly ignored, but we only have one data from so-called World Giving Index. The World Giving Index ranked 146 countries in 2018 according to the trends and activities that can be connected with solidarity in these countries. So Montenegro is ranked as 116, which is not a very good score, and this is something that we must work on in the future in terms of really promotion and putting focus on these values like empathy, solidarity, helping others, and similar. Then respect for social rules and civic participation, like two other dimensions of these 3 domains. I will just focus on civic participation, even if in Montenegro we have pretty much high level of participation, political participation, when we speak about elections. Since 2002, I think around more than 65% of people, or around 70% of people, we try to vote, use this possibility. But between elections, the level of political participation is very low, which is something that we must work on, because when there is no political participation and when people are not, they are not participating in different types of, let's say, process of political decision making, then really it can be very challenging from the perspective of achieving social cohesion. I will just finish here, and of course, if you have any questions, or we can continue maybe in this part for discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kalejan. Thank you. I'm sure there will be some questions during the Q&A. Thank you very much. So let us move on to our next speaker, Professor Adnan Prekic, also from the University of Montenegro. Hello, Professor Prekic. So Professor Prekic will be talking about contemporary perception of Montenegrin-Russian relations in the context of Euro-Atlantic integration, from allied to enemy states, which of course is particularly topical after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. Professor Prekic, I would just kindly ask you, as with the previous speakers, if you could keep to 12 minutes so that we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So the floor is yours, and welcome to the conference.
Okay, I'll try. Thank you. Dear colleagues, at the beginning, allow me to greet and say it's my pleasure to be participant of this conference. The topic of my presentation will be contemporary perception of Montenegrin and Russian relation in the context of Euro-Atlantic integration. My presentation will be somewhat different from the all previous because I'm focusing the historical context of these relations, and my idea is to highlight the key elements of this relation in the both historical context and analyze the modern interpretation of the public discourse in the Montenegro about Russian and Russian relationship with Montenegro. I try to illustrate and explain from the history of Montenegrin-Russian relation and focus on the strong Russophile feelings of Montenegro, because that relation have built on deep historical background, and I try to analyze this relation in the last 300 years with special focus on the last 10 years when Montenegro from Russia is become, I quote, enemy state. Of course, I refer of the most important moment, and the final version of this paper I involve more details. So let's begin. At the end of the 16th century, Montenegro lost statehood and was concrete of the Ottoman Empire, and Ottoman Empire 1496 formed one of the new administrative units. He's called him Montenegro Sanjak. Later, a couple decades after that, Montenegro separate from the different administrative area, that is be one of the part of the Skadar and second Herzegovina Sanjak. In the 16th and the first of the half 17th century, it's not problem with Ottoman government in Montenegro, but first problem appear in the middle 17th century, and they generate of the central government weakness of the Ottoman Empire. That generates some kind of the separatism of the local feudal lords from the Ottoman rulers, and that impose new tax obligation of the local population. After that, he start beginning one of the resistant movement, and in Montenegro, first of all, resistant movement, have support of the Venetian Republic, and he have military and financial support of the Venetian Republic from Montenegrin tribal communities. Invoking Christian origins, many and military supports, Venetian become the key partners of the liberation movement of Montenegro. That is from the start from the 18th century, and the possible of the alliance with the Montenegrin tribal community was quickly acknowledged but with Russia, and the Russian ruler Peter I and Peter Great, who is defined the new geopolitical goals of the Russian. And that new geopolitical goals, including Russian access from the Warm Sea, that is Black Sea, and after that control of the Mediterranean. In that conflict, on that geopolitical position, Russian diplomacy begins look from the among Christian of the Ottoman Empire, and in the June 1711, he's have special delegation from the Russian Tsar. He's go to all local tribe and Christianity community. One of them is being Montenegro. And that started some kind of the relation with Montenegro and Russia. In the June 1711, special delegation of the Russian arrived in the Cetinje, and that begin of the political military alliance between Montenegro and the Russian. And the next 200 years, the Russian will be strategic foreign policy partner of the Montenegrin liberation movement against Ottoman Empire. And in this 200 years relation, it's be ups and downs, but empirical data and historical research confirms the Russian reason is be very practical. Is very relatively little money. He's managed to gain strategic support and the important part of the Ottoman Empire. This is part from the Venetian Republic. This is part from the Mediterranean. This is very important geopolitical part of the Mediterranean from the Russian geopolitical reasons in Montenegro. During the first meeting in the Petrograd, Metropolitan Danilo, ruler of Montenegro, 1715, his want offer of the Russian Tsar to establish protectorate to Montenegro, and his promise in return to military engagement of the Montenegro with Ottoman Empire. But the Russian Tsar, he don't accept that because he don't want direct conflict with the Ottoman port from the Montenegro. On the other hand, Montenegro developed completely uncritical fascination of traditional patriarchal society with Russian and Orthodoxy. And that's cult of the Russian in the Montenegro established very quickly. Patriarchal and traditional community like Montenegro, he's needs some kind of the paterfamilias, and he's found that paterfamilias in the Russian government or the Russian Tsar. We have couple reasons to make this conclusion, but a strong pro-Russian feeling in Montenegro in the 18th centuries is illustrate one of the story with potatoes in Montenegro. First of all, potatoes is the first agricultural culture who is significantly have influence of the improvement of the living cost. Montenegrin ruler Peter I brought potatoes from the Trieste, from the Italy in 1786, but his know it's been more interesting and more influence if said for that potatoes is from the Russian. And he's come to Montenegro, he said, this is a Russian potatoes, and that is culture he's be known like in Montenegro like Russian potatoes. So that's symbolically say what is influence of the Russian have in Montenegro. Another story is episode with the failed Tsar Peter of the Three. He's also testified like Montenegro fascination of the Russia. Montenegro accepted that's a lion imperium, and nothing changed this because after arrival of the one Russian delegation and confirmation that is that Peter of Three is fake Tsar, that is not matter for Montenegro, and he's want Russia Tsar from his ruler, which also talk about Russian influence in the Montenegro. But this relation have good periods and bad periods. One of the most interesting periods is the period with the ruler of Montenegrin Prince Danilo I, and most serious conflict between Montenegro and Russian government occurred after Crimean War and the Paris Conference in the 1856. But Montenegrin ruler Danilo I decided to look new foreign policy, and he's find new allies, that is be France. With help of the France and the Napoleon of the Third, Danilo is be ready to formally recognize the rule of the Ottoman Sultan from exchange in the board autonomy for Montenegro. This is be direct below the Russian interests and which every way initiate the internal opposition of the Montenegrin influence in Danilo and give up of this idea. Finally, according to some interpretation, murder of the Prince Danilo in 1861, one connected with individual who have a direct control from the Russian government. Strong alliance between Montenegro and Russia is established during the new Prince of Montenegro, Prince Nicola, who is ruled from 1816 from the 1918 and 1960 maybe, because he's have arranged to complete the pen of the Montenegrin budget of the
Just
Russian
to say you have 2 minutes.
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry. I must better I go from some kind of the conclusion because I have in my part this part from the Second War and also part with period of the between First and Second War, but we don't have clear empirical data, but it's very clear of the success of all the social communist movement of Montenegro was significant contribute with cult of the Russia. That is also be with the period in the separate with Yugoslavia and Soviet Union 1948. But if I have try, I go to some kind of the modern period and modern cooperation with Russia and Montenegro. But until the end of the 20th century, relation between Montenegro and Russia is all of them from the level of the culture of economic, but after 1998 in political cooperation is starting the new episode. And in the first period, Russia was against Montenegrin independence, but they gradually begin to change their attitudes. The fact of the Russian direct support of Montenegro plans to follow it, and by the brief of the Prime Minister Sergei Kirilenko in the May 1990, and the Russian government decided to open consulate in the Podgorica. After meeting with the Prime Minister of Montenegro, Milo Đukanović, and Russian President Vladimir Putin in 2004, Russian changed some kind of the course from the Montenegro, and he's recognized way to Montenegro to independence. And after independence 2006, we have very good economic relation. Russia be one of the most important investor in the Montenegro and the largest Montenegrin company, that is aluminium plant, who is established from the Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. And 2007, Russian tried to make to be owner of the energetic sector of the Montenegro. So Russian companies M Plus Group and Belon tried to become owner of the thermal power plant Pljevlja and energetic sector in the Montenegro. Everything is changing after 2011 when Russia, but especially after aggression Russia against Crimea, and Montenegro clears the decision to join to NATO. Montenegro joined to sanction with the Russian, and after that start too many problems. I'm now don't talk about that. I just want to some kind of the conclusion about historical overview of the Montenegro-Russian relationship, and I try to in the paper recognize all that what I want to say. So when I said key political views of the Russia in Montenegro formed predominantly on the historical narratives. Their narratives use uncritical and romantically. Okay, Russian helped co-liberation movement against Ottoman Empire in the 18th and the 19th century, but that's due with very practical geopolitical reason. Russia have some geopolitical reason, and he support Montenegro for key reason, and Montenegro have some kind of another liberation reason with respect that Russian help. What's happened in the 2006, Russian political support was linked with economic influence with Montenegro, but Montenegro aspiration to be member of the NATO have dominantly changed everything, and now contemporary interpretation and the Russian influence in Montenegro is dominantly a consequence of the tradition and the history. So I make some kind of the end, but that's all. Thank you.
Professor Prekic, thank you very much for, I realized that the time was quite limited, but thank you very much. And we look forward to reading your paper, and hopefully there will be some questions in the Q&A session. Professor Banovic.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes. Professor Banovic is from the Ethnographic Institute of the Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts in Belgrade, and he will be talking about controversies over Montenegrin identity after the political turn in 2020. Can Montenegro overcome identity tensions on its path towards the EU membership? The floor is yours again, 10, 12 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, dear Professor, dear colleagues. It is my great honor and privilege to participate today's workshop with the people of the United Europe. I regret for not being in Udine and to meet you all in person, but I hope the future will bring more opportunity for joint projects. So I will do my best to pack everything in 10, 12 minutes. The topic of my presentation is controversies over Montenegrin identity after the political turn in 2020. In the very beginning, let me personal note about Montenegrin identity. Namely, in its essence, my doctoral dissertation defended in 2010 was about Montenegrin identity. Namely, it contained a few chapters devoted to the reproduction of Montenegrin identity after 26, the year when Montenegro gained its independence. Then I published a few papers about Montenegrin identity, participated at conferences speaking about Montenegrin identity. Some new papers on Montenegrin identity were sent to me on peer reviewing process. But to be frank, after some time, I have lost my interest in Montenegrin identity. Or precisely to explain this with non-academic language, I found this topic somehow boring. Namely, I originally come from cultural anthropology, and thanks to Professor Milenkovic, I originally come with good theoretical knowledge about writing culture, theory of ethnography, as well as about philosophy of history. And in my own perception, it is very easy to understand a few very basic things. There is a difference between reality and narrative related to that reality, between past reality and accounts of past reality. There is a difference between critical historiography and scientific popular narratives. Additionally, nations are modern categories thanks to historical and poets' narratives, national symbols, flags, sentences, codes of arms, customs, intangible cultural heritage, and so on. So people can imagine their members of their nations, which wasn't possible in the medieval period, of course. Then identity is fluid category. Some people believe in these historical accounts, some people believe in those historical accounts. Some politicians instrumentalize these historical accounts, some politicians instrumentalize those historical accounts. And there are various meta-discursive practices by which this instrumentalization may happen. What I want to say, after initial research that I conducted almost 15 years ago, every new analysis on identity tensions is somehow predictable. It is why I lost my interest in identity issues, although it was profitable regarding overall academic reputation. I spent a few years with no interest in identity at all. However, a poor management of identity was one of the core reasons why Đukanović's DPS went to opposition after 30 years. Then, even a poorer management of identity was one of the core reasons why the first government after DPS fell down after ruling Montenegro only a year and a half. Finally, these days we can see that identity is one of the biggest challenges for the recently elected Montenegrin government. Some say that identity could shake new Montenegrin government even harder than or the economic shockwaves from the war in Ukraine. Having the previously mentioned in mind, identity is still a very powerful force, and it definitely should be a subject of continual anthropological research, particularly because key and powerful concepts such as culture, identity, multiculturalism should not be left to less knowledgeable administrative workers, interest groups, or amateurs. So in this light, I want to present this research topic. Those who participated at the last conference in Belgrade might remember that my presentation was about how EU and NATO have become such important factors in negotiating contemporary Montenegrin identity, and how contested historical narratives started to be so significant all around Montenegro. In order to save time, I will not repeat characteristics of theoretical methodological framework again. Briefly, after obtaining the independence, Montenegrin elites proclaimed joining EU and NATO as a primary foreign policy interest and desired future of Montenegro. Of course, any desired future necessarily requires an image of a desired past, and various meta-discursive practices acted as mediation between appropriate past, the present, and desired future. That official Montenegrin national narrative would go as follows. Victorious battles were fought to establish the conditions for Montenegrin independence and international recognition at the Congress of Belgrade, 1878. Then Montenegro collapses with the Podgorica assembly. Then immediate attempts to regain statehood is defeated. Then Montenegro initiates the anti-fascist struggle in World War II, which resulted in return of certain elements of statehood as a part of socialist Yugoslavia. And finally, on 2006, Montenegro regains its statehood. You can see everything in this slide. In this meta-discursive practice, membership in the EU and NATO is given as the continuation of this path. Of course, the selectivity in creating versions of the past is inherently the result of present desires, so certain important historical elements were ignored. Montenegrin Serbs held the belief that the ruling elites roundly ignore anything that had something to do with the Serbian character of Montenegrin history and tradition, as well as that Montenegrin ruling elites and Đukanović in person had the great support of EU, NATO, and the West in general for identity politics that deny and ignore Serbian character of Montenegrin identity. That was a widespread belief among Serbs in Montenegro. Parts of the characteristic statement would be, we are the second-class citizens, we cannot get a position in the public sector, our children cannot find a job in the public sector, they are introducing a new language, they are changing national history, they are changing national identity, they will finally try to take our church. Many of my interlocutors mentioned the church as the ultimate and only remaining bearer of their national identity in Montenegro, which is still not under control of Montenegrin government. I am talking about the research that I conducted 15 years ago for this. In this flammable political and identity context, as a part of a new political program in 2019, Đukanović announced that the DPS, Montenegrin ruling party, will work on the renewal of the Montenegrin Orthodox Church as inseparable part of Montenegrin identity and Montenegrin statehood. Then, in late December, Montenegrin parliament voted a new law on freedom of religion and belief and the legal status of religious communities. According to this law, religious communities must prove ownership of church property that had been built before 1918. And if there is no such evidence, that property will be considered state property. The Serbian Orthodox Church in Montenegro believes that this law is taking away its property. So in late December 2019, a wave of protests started against the controversial religion law. Demonstrations continued in January, February, March as peaceful protest walks mostly organized by Metropolitan of Montenegro and Littoral of the Serbian Orthodox Church in the most of Montenegrin municipalities. As time went on, a considerable percentage of Montenegro's population took to the street opposing the law. On the wave of these protests called Lithium Montenegrin opposition, led by pro-Serbian political forces, gained a slender victory, and in the near 30-year rule of Democratic Party of Socialists. So, be that as it may, pro-Serb political parties are in power now, but what is going on with Montenegrin identity after they came to power? Namely, following the political turn in 2020, new Montenegrin ruling elites began to challenge the image of the past established over the previous 15 years, causing many new tensions, identity issues throughout Montenegro. Some new people, such as ethnic Montenegrins or those people from minority cultures, such as Bosniaks, Muslims, Albanians, Croatians, started to believe that they are discriminated against only on the basis of their identity, their culture, and historical narratives they believe in. And they have very strong arguments to prove their discrimination. In that respect,
Branko, just to say you have 2 minutes, just so that you don't. Okay.
In that respect, the vast majority of arguments relate to two concepts that lie in the core of modern Montenegro. The one is multiculturalism, and the second one is secularism. I don't have enough time to say something about secularism. I will conclude with challenges to multiculturalism. I conducted my ethnographic study mostly among Bosniaks and Muslims, but also my interlocutors were Albanians and Croats living in Montenegro, and I wanted to detect and analyze discourses in which minority peoples problematize emerging threats to the established model of Montenegrin multiculturalism. Namely, since the turn of the millennium, Montenegro has demonstrated exceptional commitment to the country's multicultural character and the importance of multiculturalism for the democratic development of Montenegrin society's founding documents. Multiculturalism is constantly perceived as one of the elements of democratization society and indicator of membership in the modern European or Western community. However, following the political changes that occurred in 2020, ethnic minority parties refused to participate in the Montenegrin government, expressing concern that the new government would undermine Montenegro's established multicultural character. My interlocutors from minority cultures, with no exception, on the level of consensus, claimed that the new Montenegrin government, or precisely the government that ruled Montenegro from political turn in 2020 until a few months ago, were constantly undermining multiculturalism in Montenegro. They had very strong arguments from their attitudes, such that they have limited access to employment in the civil service and especially in the state-owned company. To be frank, among newly employed and newly promoted people across public sector, people originally come from minority cultures were a rarity. So let me conclude now. Conclude now the first phase of ethnographic research. The first phase of ethnographic research from 2019 showed that the local sources held belief that the state did not look favorably on their activities on the promotion of Serbian identity, as well as they had limited access to the employment in civil service and especially in state-owned companies. By contrast, the second phase of ethnographic research in 2022 showed that the same beliefs began to generate among local Bosniak Muslims, Croatians, and Albanians after a new parliamentary majority dominated by pro-Serbian parties came into power. So from this research, it is evident that our specific form of multiculturalism lacks the capacity to be legitimately accepted among all communities and to serve as a driver of development. The response of society should be complex and systematic and system-oriented, because a key and powerful concept, as I mentioned in the very beginning, such as culture, multiculturalism, identity, should not be left to less knowledgeable administrative workers, interest groups, amateurs, identity entrepreneurs. In that respect, the empowerment of academic resources and their use in solving social problems is of particular importance. In that context of improving academic resources, it is very important also to strengthen the ethnological and anthropological perspective. Sorry for breaking the time. I have broken on 2 minutes. So sorry. Thank you for my pleasure. I am open for all.
Professor Banovic, thank you very much for keeping to the time limit. I know it was a bit of a constraint, but we thank you very much and look forward to reading your final paper. So let us move now to our last speaker, Professor Marko Pizev from the University of Belgrade. And let's see if our speaker is online. Yes. Hello. So
Hello,
Marko,
everyone.
nice to see you. So Marko will be talking about the anti-globalist discourse and nationalist appropriations, some recent developments in Serbia. Again, could I kindly ask you to limit your talk to 10-12 minutes, please?
Okay, I will start now, and hello everyone, and thank you for allowing me to participate in the round table, and I will do my best to be very brief and quick. Okay, and I will start immediately so that we won't lose any time. Well, there are many contested descriptions of globalization, let's say, but only a few contextual frameworks through which we can observe anti-globalist discourses in Eastern Europe's post-socialist societies. One of them, conceived from a primordial nationalist standpoint in contemporary Serbia, relies strongly on theories of conspiracy. Primordialism can be defined as a sentiment arising from a set of beliefs and discourses about a perceived essential continuity of a group, recognized in terms of kith and kin, a group that is located, let's say, in a specific territory or place, which may or may not be current place of the people concerned. With theories of conspiracy, I will also define them very briefly as specific theories, beliefs that a group of actors colludes in secret to attain goals that are widely seen as malevolent. So, combined with conspiratorial beliefs, these primordial perspectives of national identity aim to strengthen the in-group ties in the face of the apparent evil plotting of some outside clique. So, outlined in such a conceptual framework, globalization is understood as a grand-scale conspiracy and evaluated as negative, primarily in the spheres of political and social cultural life of the Serbian community today. In this line of reasoning, the detrimental effects of globalization stem from corrupting the nation's body, with immigrants, chemtrails, 3G, 4G, 5G, wireless mobile telecommunications technology, virus pandemic outbreaks. Then they corrupt the nation's soul, or rather its ethnic traditions, cultural values, spiritual unity under the leadership of the Serbian Orthodox Church. And also they ostensibly corrupt the, let's say, ethnically exclusive identity of Serbia by labeling, for instance, national heroes as war criminals, by supporting Kosovo independence, by limiting autonomous political decision making from the outside and so forth. So without going into some deep considerations on whether these beliefs do or do not correspond with intersubjectively shared reality, of course, some of them are certainly a calculated mix of true and false premises, I would like to point out certain abstract features of the anti-globalist propaganda disclosed in the discursive form of theories of conspiracy. There is an anti-Western element to anti-globalist discourse, which basically says that the West, guided by USA, is working on the gradual annihilation of Serbia. This devised sentiment of intrinsic Western hostility towards Serbia and Serbs is regularly rationalized by the larger idea that Western powers seek to eliminate Russia from the broader framework of global power relations, with Serbia playing only a secondary, albeit significant part in this larger conflict. Serbia is a fraternal nation associated by mutual Slavic background and Orthodox Christianity. However, there are also some, let's say, explicit conspiratorial narratives which presuppose that West in general and USA in particular act as agents of destruction of Serbian society and culture as such, regardless of Russian factor. And this particular perspective of direct Western hostility is rationalized by arguments related to more recent history of Serbia, that is to the violent breakup of Yugoslav state during the early 90s, and the position adopted by most Western leaders concerning the Serbian involvement in the Yugoslav civil war. And this is the argument of Western betrayal. Then there is also of course, the let's say historical development concerning the NATO intervention in 1999, which is still termed as the NATO aggression in the most Serbian in the Serbian public sphere. And this is the argument of Western hostility, that is animosity. And of course, there is the argument of, let's say, this major Western powers' support of self-declared Kosovo independence from Serbia. And this is the argument of Western malice. And these three key moments in Serbia's recent history are being recounted as testaments of global conspiracy against the country, with the American-led secret plan against Serbia apparently being presently developed in more covert, more perfidious ways. Also, the main focus of conspiracy theories and their supporters in Serbia is not only the West. Over the last decades or so, the world of Islam also poses a major threat to the primordial sense of the nation's well-being and nation's security. And this fear of global Islamic caliphate, which threatens whole Europe and is growing its tentacles in Serbia, has already displayed its power to mobilize citizens who wish to see their streets, their municipalities, cities, once again free from dark-skinned Muslim youth sleeping in parks, sleeping in, wandering around bus stations. And these unwanted elements in the picture of this clean primordial neighborhoods were, of course, growing in numbers during the migrant crisis in the last decade and have provoked sporadic violence against migrants in different parts of Serbia. Informal groups of citizens, codenamed national patrols, have been organized in order to search and subdue individuals and groups of migrants moving about freely off camps. And this fear of Islam, of global Islam, in Serbia is rationalized also in many ways. One of the main strategies of quasi-rational argumentation is to draw analogies between Muslim migrants and militant Islamic extremists who have already carried out their suicide operations across Europe and beyond. And in this line of reasoning, every male Muslim migrant is a potential terrorist. And this, of course, tendency to assign collective guilt to an ethnic or national or religious group is extensively studied, of course, in many disciplines. But in the context of conspiracy theories, it serves really to increase and strengthen ideological positions against the entire community the perpetrators belong to on religious, cultural, and racial grounds. And in this type of argument, all Muslims are to blame for the past and recent acts of violence on the simple basis of being Muslim. There is an additional distinctive strategy of racialization of Muslim immigrants on the grounds of their culture. And this other strategy aims to portray male Muslims as highly sexual others. As it is argued, the excessively lustful Muslim incomers seek to attack and sexually molest Serbian women because of their racial preference of lighter phenotype and their allegedly sexually repressive culture. There is, however, as the arguments go, a more duplicitous manner of conduct of lustful male Muslims in Europe. And in this bleaker conspiratorial scenario, they act as regular citizens, but behind closed doors, in their bedrooms, they indulge in tireless procreation of children with their own women. Once they make as many children as possible, they will educate their progeny to seek their own Muslim partners and eventually make more Muslim children. And thus Europe shall become a Muslim continent in the matter of a few decades.
Marco, you have about 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I will make myself faster. So, as evident, these narratives of global Islamic threat in Serbia do not differ greatly from many similar Islamophobe narratives in many parts of Europe. But in their primordial, let's say, mode of operation, conspiracy theories, no matter if they are anti-Western or anti-Muslim, they do not hold fast to some coherent system of belief. Conspiracy theories in their primordialist framework tend to be really very eclectic. They can incorporate Muslim minorities, USA establishment, civil aircraft, Chinese vaccines in a very loosely connected yet highly resolved anti-globalist outlook. For instance, during the last 2 years, in the full swing of COVID pandemic, several protests gathering hundreds of people took place on the streets of Belgrade, and the protesters in these occasions spontaneously started dancing a traditional folk dance, Užičko kolo, around the newly erected monument of Stefan Nemanja, the presumed forefather of Serbian nation. And in this traditional circle dance, a plethora of what would seem like variously motivated citizens stood side by side, danced hand in hand anti-vaxxers with anti-migrant demonstrators, corona skeptics with anti-gay marriage campaigners, anti-5G activists with demonstrators lamenting the betrayal of Kosovo. But this strangely linked assembly of protesters was in fact united by a common basic attitude, the anti-intellectual skepticism about the dominant discourse on some or other social crisis broadcasted by the state media. And more often than not, this, let's say, anti-globalist discourse in the primordial conspiratorial mindset was really a simple inversion of the discourse provided by state media. So the root cause of pandemic becomes a fake virus. The migrants become fake migrants. The vaccines, instead of protecting people from harm, become a weapon of secret enslavement or destruction of human population, and so on. I will conclude by this. Let's say, the Serbian political leadership has a very, very tolerant view of this, let's say, conservative elements in society. This, let's say, existing political leadership is engaged in a game of coquetry with far-right conservatives, as it requires their support. But it simultaneously fears them, since the state politics with their conservative, let's say, liberal views, tentatively pro-European perspectives, are always on the verge of being re-evaluated from below as not nationalist enough. So the slightest misstep by the political leaders can move the nationalists, can move this conservative stratas of society from docility to very unpredictable initiative. And as a consequence, a huge portion of political energy and attention in Serbia under the present government is lost to keeping internal conservative areas, stratas of society at bay, with, of course, prospects of European future becoming more distant and elusive as the time passes. So thank you very much. I will finish this line.
Marco, again, like the other speakers before you, thank you very much to keeping to the time slot. I know it was a bit of a constraint, but we look forward to reading your paper. Thank you very much. Okay, now we can, I think, very quickly open up to Q&A, and I already have a question in the Q&A box online. It's actually a question by Edin Skrebo, I hope I'm pronouncing his name properly, from Milano Bicocca. And the question is, good morning. Thank you for your interesting remarks on the EU integration of the Western Balkans. In the light of the most recent events and what can be described as double standards approach to the different aspiring EU member states, why should the Western Balkans still commit to the European path? Marco, would you like to try? Or who wants to start? Irena. Ladies first, but I think that was a kind of...
Thank you. Yeah, well, it's my answer would be because Europe, if nothing else, these states and people have to signal to Europe that they are part of Europe by insisting to become part of it. But on a more rational level, the reason is that despite everything, there is no other power, transformative power, as the EU could be in the best case. So the alternative is to say we will not, the alternative is Turkey. Because this is what Turkey did. And they said we are not going to beg anymore. And if we look at the development in Turkey, we could not conclude that it is increasing democracy and life standards, to just take the two main points. So despite all the critique on the process, the EU as the EU project in this region, that is the only one that can foster transformation and reforms, seems to me the only path.
Marco.
Well,
thank you, Irena.
Thanks to Edin for that maybe a bit tricky question. In any case, a hard question. I think the bottom line, and something we should always have in mind, first, geography. A region is part of Europe, and geographically it's surrounded by Europe completely. So being a part of Europe, you can't stay outside of the club. You are surrounded by. Of course, there are good models outside of Europe, but there are democracies outside of Europe. There are developed societies with rule of law, respect of human rights, and so on and so forth. But they are outside of Europe, and we are part of this continent. European Union is probably the greatest, not probably, for sure, the greatest peace project in the history. It's economically developed. It has proven to be a strong chance for countries to enormously progress in just a decade, in just a generation. And at the end, people are dying to reach Europe. People are dying in boats to get to Europe. That is very misfortunate, but that is for a good reason, because Europe, with all its problems and all the obstacles and everything, is by far the best place in the world, and that's why countries should continue to strive for EU membership, and should continue to reform for themselves, if not for anything else, just to continue with the reforms and strive for the EU.
Okay, thank you, Marco. If I can abuse of my, oh no, okay, go ahead. You've got to come here though, because we have used that microphone. Great.
Thank you. And sorry in advance for the question. I've tried during the coffee break to ask a quick question to the panelists, and my question is especially for Irena and for Marco, and it's the same as I asked you before, but I'm not completely satisfied of the answer because we didn't have time to discuss it completely. And is the issue about borders in the region, and the possibility to, the intention of a rediscuss border. Is it an issue at stake or not? Thank you so much.
Oh. Well, it's a tricky question, because every time you start considering or reconsidering borders, you can ignite a conflict. So borders do have that kind of potential. However, on the other hand, if the reconsideration of borders is done in a matter of international conference, peace conference, conference leading to some bigger outcome, then it could be maybe done in a peaceful fashion, but only if all sides win at the end. Well, not maybe win, but not lose and get something as a result. So if you are renegotiating any kind of border, you need to get something for that at the end. And I think looking into recent history, Dayton peace agreement showed that in Bosnia how internal borders were kind of renegotiated at the end with this very specific structure which was put in place to keep the peace in the country. It's a country with a lot of challenges, but at the end, it's a country where we have peace for almost 30 years now. So I think that's an important message.
Elena.
Well, my remark would be more that would go in the direction that the issue of borders are raised in the region mostly for populistic purposes and nationalistic. So borders are a very good issue to mobilize on a national level in order to create animosity. And this is something that political elites in the region, not all of them, but some from time to time like to use to distract. So whenever you feel that whenever somebody in the region who is in power feels endangered in a way or questioned, borders are just like a bone that you thrown into on the playground, and you know that everyone will come and for some time be upset with it. And so I look at this border issue on something that would eventually become completely irrelevant if all other things are regulated, or as Marco said, if you reach an agreement, a wide agreement in which everyone would win something, then the loss of a piece of territory, nobody would care about, or at least not the majority.
And Professor Bonini has a question, but I would also like to ask the technicians if Professor Prekic is still there, as far as you know. È ancora presente, Professor Prekic?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, great. Okay, I have a question for you afterwards. Okay.
A very quick, thank you. A very quick question, maybe more for Marco than for Irena. Let us imagine such a conference would take place. Who would be the best political mediator in such a case? I know it's not simple, but I'm really curious.
Okay, thank you for this question. I think the question is more for international relations scholars or for political scientists. So probably Irena could add to this. Of course, it would have to include European Union member states. Well, maybe European Union as such as well, but of course the most important member states of the European Union, but foremost, you need to have United States on board for this kind of arrangements, because like I think that also our recent history teaches us that once United States take a lead, you come to some kind of result, and then again I turn to Dayton peace agreement.
Okay, I know we have Daniela. Just before Daniela asks her question, I wanted to ask Professor Prekic something very quickly, and that is, what effect has Montenegro's membership of NATO had on the relationship between Montenegro and Serbia? If you can maybe answer that very quickly.
That is maybe very complex question, because some kind of the direct relations with government of Serbia, with government of the Russia, and if you see some kind of the relation between two countries from the Montenegro, you have some kind of a similar position about that. First of all, with relation with Russia, his confrontation starts after 2012 or 2014, formally after aggression of the Crimea. And after that, you also see some kind of the different. So if you see approach from the Russian government with Montenegro, you see some kind of the similarity with Serbia. And after that, he started 2014, and we have direct conflict and political conflict with the government of the Serbia and government of Montenegro in 2020, when he started movement from the, we call Litija movement of the Serbian Orthodox Church. And that is very connected. If you see for some kind of the report of the NGO, some kind of the report of the pro-Atlantic organization, you see the direct conflict, direct connection with Russian NGO and the NGO with the Serbian, who have huge influence in the political movement in Montenegro. I try to.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. No, that's great, Adnan. Okay, one more question from Daniela, and then I would like to hand the floor to Professor Scarciglia.
Thank you very much. One short question for Marko Milenkovic, of course, and Irena. You are both experts in the field of EU integration, and we are still under this last summit impressions. So really, I want to ask you, you both said when we speak about EU integration of Western Balkan countries, and in the light of a new domination of geostrategic motivation and a new mental map of Europe that Irena mentioned, and also in the light of alternative non-membership models that you, Marko, spoke about, what is your prediction for Western Balkan region in terms of EU integration? I would really love to hear from you, because you really obviously know the field very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, for again a bit a tricky question, because it's very hard to tell at this point. You see how things are unfolding on the international scene very fastly, and we don't know where this current conflict in Ukraine will go, how it will affect Irena, also reflected on that a bit. To be honest, I'm not very optimistic in terms of membership prospects, as you have seen. I mean, that's why I'm also dealing with this differentiated integration options, also with the great help of CCSED for some years now. So that's why we made that one of the focuses of our work. However, I think that things are gradually changing and gradually moving, in terms of that there is a recognition that something needs to be done. So something has to be done, whether it will be under the auspices of some political union plus a bit more of EU funds, or maybe it gets a more coherent institutional framework. We don't know, but in short term, nothing special, I would say. In midterm, I think we could expect some new kind of framework, and then in a long term, we hope for membership for the whole of the region.
Okay, thank you, Marko. Irena, very quickly, and then we'll hand over to Professor Scarciglia.
Yes, well, I have to say I'm quite pessimistic that anything will happen, for the reason that geostrategically, which now is the only modus mode in which the European Union is capable to think, the Western Balkans are too little endangered by Russia in order for the European Union to step in. So Moldova, for example, in this sense, has a big advantage of being really under threat. And I think this, the distance, the geographical and also political distance, no matter how much we talk about this in Serbian and Montenegrin case, and in the case of Republika Srpska and Bosnia, it is still not strong enough. So the ideal situation would be that Russia pushes more in the region, so that the European Union, out of this danger, wants to react and to offer. And just 1 minute, if I can go back to the question of Monica, there was one commission that was called the Amato Commission in 2008, when it was in 2004 starting. It was also led by Weizsäcker. So it was 20 experts from different countries trying to solve and to come up with the solution. And they came up with the solution that Kosovo should be should gain independence. Which eventually then happened in 2008 on the basis of this result of this commission. However, the commission also had a strong recommendation that this should go with a immediate EU accession, which then was not implemented. And I believe that would have, if they would have adopted the whole report of this commission, the independence of Kosovo would have been digested by now by Serbia, most of all, but in the region. But the European Union, or the decision makers, in fact, decided to push the independence of Kosovo, hoping that this will resolve problems. But this other part of the cake, they did not take. So I think without a strong commitment of the EU to open up, there could not be any hope.
Thank you, Irena. Okay, great. Let me now hand over to Professor Scarciglia, who I think is online and wanted to say a few words.
Okay, thank you, Justin, and thank you, Laura, for this invitation today. And I am lucky to be in this second presentation, now in the first day, because like a comparative legal scholar, it's really important for me interdisciplinarity. And so and the first perspective, history, legal history, and also anthropology and ethnology. So today was really interesting for me, and I don't have a presentation, but some short reflection about the brilliant presentations, today's presentations. The first one, we discussed about 3 different topics: identity, rule of law, and enlargement, EU enlargement. These 3 arguments are strictly connected. There is in relationship, and in every complex dimension, in every countries in Western Balkans, there is some complexity in a big area complexity. So it's very difficult to give some answer, but it's easier to have a question. The first one is, at this moment, we get used to a methodology of enlargement. There is a process, and in this process, there are many obstacles. I like very much this dualism by Irena Ristich, obstacle or chance. This is really important for our discussion at this moment. The first one is we have in a complex area and in area which globalized effects comes, we say just economic effects of war. But at this moment, the last consideration by Irena Ristich was that Russia push. At this moment, there is anti-globalized conflicts because when in public law we say a lot of time globalization produces anti-globalization effects, and so this one is a big anti-globalization effect. And with respect to other year, we have a lot of social instruments to communicate. So we discuss about the form of communication. We speak about fake news, about propaganda, about identity, about enemies, about a lot of things. But the first variable in this moment is the war. The war is produce political effects at this moment, and the war produce economic problems, and we are not out of pandemics. And so there is another global problem. The war produced extraordinary unity of European institutions of Europe. And so this is the first idea, which is the position of countries of Western Balkans about the war, about the crimes in this war. We say every day in television, and there are many images of this war, but social media produce different kind of images. But the problem is at this moment when the European institution have a common position, which is the other position. So we found different position between, for example, Albania or other countries and other, for example, also Serbian politics. But for analyzing this problem or this form of communication, different communication, is really important for us to consider history. And in many presentations, in some presentations, there was the problem of history. It's not possible to analyze all today's fact without knowing the history. This is a really important for a comparative legal scholar. So it's difficult to say why one country says I condemn this aggression or not. The second point is not only enlargement of European Union, and for example, this decision to promote countries Ukraine and Moldova as candidates in so fast a way, different from the other processes, make that some countries, I think Albania or other countries, stay in the hall, and the other can give very fast to this process. This process is very long. It's not easy to conclude this process, particularly at this moment when economic problem is really big. We know the economic decision of the financial institution. So there is another problem. The problem is enlargement of NATO, because the Russia wants not, a government of Russia wants not an enlargement on NATO. And so this is another big global problem in this area. And for that, I think the it's not easy to say what happens. Also, I have the same idea of the last intervention of Irena Ristic. That at this moment is not possible to speak about the enlargement also for these candidates, because there is a big difference between the countries to, for example, to fight corruption or to have rule of law. So in many countries we discuss about the topic deglobalizing rule of law and rule of law in unconstitutional countries. So there is quasi an oxymoron, but we discuss about the old concept. For this is important to have some ideas from the youngest colleagues. The last thing, I don't know what is the meaning of this word, we the people, because I won't say about a definition of we the people, because 2 days ago a writer and poet, American writer and poet, Siri Usfeld, the wife of Paul Auster, commented the decision of Supreme Court, and she wrote in a literary arbor the sense of the word we the people, and she said we did not include women, indigenous people, blacks, Asians, Catholics, or Jews. So when we speak in this Congress, in the sense we the people of the United States, what is the meaning that we want to give to these words, we the people? So I think it's really important to speak about intersection. I know many interesting words: intersection, pluralism, confrontation of identities, not identities as private language, as say the philosopher Saul Kripke, American philosopher Saul Kripke, because this one is not private language. Identity is not private language, but is a language of communication. And this idea, I think, can bring something to this absolutely important discourse that enlargement of European Union to Western Balkan countries is absolutely necessary to stabilize all the big area. And so the question is not if, but when these countries can obtain membership. Not if, but when. And so I think that the strategies must have an account that is not possible to leave challenges of enlargement in the focus of technicalities, but is necessary to give many possibilities to confrontation, to collaboration, to communication in the sense of Habermas discourse. So for me as a comparative scholar, we have a great revolution between comparison to collaboration. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Roberto Scarciglia, for ending this conference on such a positive note. I think we've had a day and a half of true reflection on the European state of mind. I think we have to thank all the speakers that we've had. Of course, the scientific committee, Laura Montanari, Marco Milenkovic, Irena Ristic, Alessia Cozzi. I'd like to thank the technicians for their help, especially this morning with all the online panelists. As far as I'm concerned, I live in the hope that the next conference where we see the words "we the people of the United Europe," we will be talking about the preamble to the Constitution of Europe. And with this, I close the conference. Thank you very much.